Well, today's gospel reading is the Epiphany Story, which is a very well-known story to Christians around the world, certainly, and I suspect it's a well-known story to people who are not necessarily so familiar with the Christian story. And I want us to look at a couple of the details of the story, and then apply what does that have to do with any of us today in our Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of lives and that. And so I've heard from some folks who have been on camels in a desert at night, that it's not a pleasant experience. So this was a long journey and an arduous and difficult journey for these folks. And think about the world in which they lived at this point in time. There are wars going on all over the place. Of course, the dominant Mediterranean power by this point is Rome and its military might. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other imperial powers and expansionist powers and using violence and oppression to impose their will on other people. So it's a world in which there's all kinds of violence and war and oppression, and people are beaten down. So remember the context of this story that way. Other thing to highlight from this story is, though we have jammed it all in as part of the Christmas story, and there are cultural traditions have developed around that and that association, but that's not necessarily within the text itself. Is the second thing for us to be aware of, that some of the traditions we have in our culture are not actually in the text, in the biblical text. And the other thing for us to keep in mind about these three magi is, and it should kind of go without saying, but sometimes, we think differently when we hear things said out loud. These three were not Christian, right? I think everybody knows that. I mean, so they could have been, maybe they were Hindus, Zoroastrianism, they were into astrology, certainly. But they weren't Christian in the way that we think about Christians today and followers of Jesus. And so they're not Christian, they're from the East, we don't know a lot about them, but they have recognized with this star, this celestial event, that something big is coming. Something big, world-changing, life-changing has happened. And they set out on this arduous journey. So if you think about the world in which they lived, and all of this divisiveness, and us versus them, and everybody just taking care of their own little tribal group and self-interested group, this star at its rising, and the story of Epiphany and these different folks from the East coming to follow this star, it's a message about the universality of Jesus, how he's meant for all people. Whereas before there was all of this divisiveness and us versus them and all of this stuff, that in this Jesus, in the birth of this Jesus, it's a message for all people. A message about God is love. Instead of what we had done with religions and all of these different groups and making religion into a checklist of do's and don'ts and thou shalts and thou shalt nots and all of this sort of thing, and using religion as a means by which to judge people and exclude people and try to oppress and coerce other people. No, God is love. That's surely a message that all people can get around, is enough of the divisiveness, enough of the fighting, enough of all of the judgmentalism in our world. And what about instead, God is love? That is like a bright shining star in people's lives when we encounter people who are rooted so deeply in that knowledge that God is love. And so in terms of applying this to our own lives, and when I said, what's in this story for us, there's a prayer that was written by George Appleton, who was the Bishop of Jerusalem post-Second World War. And the book is called The Quiet Heart. And he's got this wonderful little prayer, which I always use through the Epiphany season, which I think says a lot to us. The prayer is, "O God, let there be a little brightness, a little warmth radiating from me, a little epiphany of love and holiness as I kneel before the birth of Jesus, grateful for what it tells me of you and for what it does within me. Let me be as simple and humble as the shepherds, as wise and worshipping as the wise men in the stories of that birth. And let the Christ child be born in my heart to make me with him a child of yours, a brother or sister of him, and so a lover of all I meet or hear of. O eternal light, O infinite love. Amen." I think one of the things that I most love about that prayer is that so often when we think about problems in the world, problems in our community, they are too big, too massive for any of us in an individual way to do much about. World hunger, world poverty, even the issues of homelessness and poverty in our own community. And, they're big issues. And so we get crippled a little bit by, I can't do anything about it. It's bigger than me. And what I like about that prayer is the idea that in the little circles in which I travel, the people with whom I interact, a little bit of love, a little bit of light, a little bit of warmth radiating from each of us. And so that's what I see in this Epiphany story, is it is a great encouragement to us. And there's a bit of a challenge in it for us to be very careful with our judgments of people of other religions. They were included from the get-go in the stories of Jesus' birth, right? They were there right from the beginning. And so we need to be very careful about our judgments and just focus on, what can I do in my little spheres of existence, the little worlds in which I walk on a daily basis, a little bit of warmth, a little bit of light, a little bit of love. Hopefully that's what people experience radiating from you too. And I know full well that many of you just excel at that beautifully. Amen.